I am the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. I was once just a goddess of spring, my role to help the flowers grow. The only place I had ever known was a meadow, beautiful, idyllic, quiet. It was a joy for many years, for no matter how lonely it may have felt, I was never alone. My mother was there, with nymphs, nereids, and naiads to visit me often. I had thought they were just my friends, but I was wrong. Duplicitous though not meaning to be, my friends were my guards and watchmen, for my mother was afeard of any god's intentions and kept me far away from family, from all. I am known by many names: Proserpina, Despoina, Persephassa, Persephata, and even Kore. But I am Persephone, goddess of spring and queen of the underworld. This is the story of Hades, my husband, and myself, yes. But this is not just a love story. This is a story about power. But not that of Hades, no. The tales have painted him wrong. This is the tale of how Demeter, my mother, brought the world to its knees. How my mother's love broke the promise of a king. And how I changed. How I grew from the maiden of the spring into the queen of the underworld. Not because a man snatched me away, but because I made a choice in the wake of that event. In the days when the world had no seasons yet, there was eternal beautiful weather, crops grown throughout the year, and always a flower to bloom. My job was small and often under watch of others, a helper of my mother's duties, for she tends to Gaia, the grandmother, the very earth beneath our feet. We help her grow and remain prosperous. Grandmother may be the earth, but she is not the plants on the surface. That is her daughter's domain. Demeter, she controls the balance to help the mortals thrive. And I was but another tool in her power. But I loved the gift. To grow such beauty, it was all I had ever known. With a world so wide and vast, Demeter, my mother, is brought to all places. Summoned by prayers and sacrifice, mortals need her help to feed so many mouths. She was tending to such matters that morning, and I was left with naiads, the freshwater nymphs, always kept close. We would sing and dance, listen to and watch the birds fly overhead, smile in the sun and sleep in the afternoon breeze. That day was like any other, except for one thing. A flower like no other, new to this meadow, closer to the shade, further into a patch of trees. The sunlight caught it in such a mesmerizing way. A 6-petaled flower I had not seen before, with a little cup in the middle, yellow and white. It seemed to glimmer and glow. Narcissus is its name, I now know. So distracted, I ignored the gasps of my friends as they watched the ravens fly above us. Their patterns distracted them. I wandered to it, hardly able to stop myself. I reached for the flower and grasped its stem and pulled. But it did not move an inch. I tried with both hands and pulled again. But the flower was impossibly stuck. Its roots like an old oak, not a small flower at all. I was not shaken. I was determined to have the flower that entranced me so. I pulled and pulled, and finally it was released, as if let go by the earth below. I yanked the flower with ease, but sent myself falling backwards with the force. But I was pleased. Until the hole from which the flower came began to crumble. It collapsed in on itself, widening until a large gaping hole was formed, huge and dark. The earth fell into nothing. Almost a strange tunnel. I stared down into the darkness of it, and as I squinted, I saw a mist in a small ball begin to form. The white fog cloud seemed to climb up. Then hooves appeared, and I had to jump back as a dark chariot burst from the ground, drawn by 4 black stallions. That's when I saw him for the first time. A tall god with dark hair, but something kind in his eyes. He offered me a hand and said,
I can show you a land of which you've never seen or dreamt. Places far from this, and people you've never met. I can show you a whole new realm, a place where you can be who you choose to, a place where you can be whoever you want to be. It won't take long, I promise you, and I will bring you back if you so choose to.
I was hesitant and a little frightened by his sudden offer. But I had longed to leave this meadow. I had longed to meet someone, anyone. I had asked my mother so many times and always been rejected. When you're older, when you're wiser. What if that was never? With the yellow narcissus closed in my fist, I took his outstretched hand, and he pulled me onto his chariot. We rode off down the tunnel. Suddenly in the darkness, I screamed as the hole closed behind us, and the rush of the wind on my face made me feel more alive than I had ever before.
Oh, my sweet wife, do you think I met you that day? No. On my rare travels outside of my own realm, I saw you. I took the form of a raven, taking time away from my realm to peruse the mortals in their life. I spent so much time with the dead. To fly and feel the sun on my face is a rare gift I take my pleasure in. For the underworld is so lonely. Yes, I have the many mortal souls, the deities that do duties that I must be above. And so, I'm alone in my role. I saw the nymphs, my sisters, the naiads, all beautiful, but she was unlike the rest. There was something in her eye. As she grew her flowers, smiled and danced. There was a sigh on her lips she only let slip when others were absent. A longing in her stare at the horizon. I was enchanted, like I never had been before. I had had flirtations, couplings with nymphs like Minthe and Luce, but none stirred my heart in that moment like she did. I began to visit often when I could between my duties to the underworld. I would sit and watch her, hear their whispered conversations, learn all about her, and fell for her entirely. I knew she was different. She had a hunger in her, a wish for more in her role as flower goddess. Confused by what to do, longing for someone to confide in, I flew to Olympus to talk to my youngest brother.
When I returned to my home, to my daughter, I found chaos. A flock of ravens were flying in the opposite direction when I arrived in the meadow that day, and the first thing I saw was a river that was not there before. Fear shot through me. The naiad Cyane had transformed, melted into a puddle. The babbles of the water echoing cries and sounds of weeping where splashes should be. The group of nereids and naiads I had left were throughout the edges of the meadow, frantic and on a hunt, searching each bush and flower. But for what? Their tear-stained faces shone panic as they turned to me. I looked at each of them, searching for Persephone's sweet face. Their silence told me everything. After all I had done, after everything, she was the only thing that was mine, truly mine alone. I feared something like this would happen, and my trusted, loyal guards had failed. I gave them one job, but even that was too much. In the silence, bubbles from the Cyane River echoed out words. She had heard Persephone's screams, but when she had turned to find her, to see her, she was gone. They all looked away in shame, each nymph, nereid, and naiad. They had let the one gift I had in this life become lost. And I felt my fury rise up. It burst out. The cold ice in my veins became frosted words. I cursed their lives, their souls, their very bodies. With each word, the nymphs before me transformed. Green glowing glimmers captured their bodies as they tried to run, but they were ensnared in my glowing vines. More and more coated them and held them in place. They thrashed and cried, begged for my forgiveness, swore to find her for me. But what good were they who let her get lost in the first place? They were of no use to me or anyone else as they were. So, by my will, by my frozen rage, they were transfigured. Their beautiful bodies bursting into feathers and wings, claws and talons. Their perfect faces remained, their sweet voices left unaltered. But they would never be one with the waters again. Cursed to roam the skies, I sent them to search. Nymphs no more. They were sirens. They flew off quickly, hoping that if they found her, I might change them back. But I intended no such thing. I willed my power to disguise myself, transforming into an elderly mortal woman with a cloak around my shoulders. I would find my daughter myself, for I am her mother. No matter what has happened, I would find her. I began my hunt, leaving all my duties to the wayside. It didn't matter to me. I searched, tirelessly. Through field, desert, mountain and river, ocean and lake, cave and crevice, I searched without food, without water, without rest. The days stretched into nights. Exhausted and feeling the loss of my daughter, I felt a despair grow. After days of searching, it all became too much. I had asked anyone who would listen, and still no response. I looked into the well of another deep cave and saw myself. My haggard reflection showing the torment of my mind outwardly on my body. And all I could do was cry. I wept into that cave. Light was then all around me as I opened my eyes to see a goddess with a flaming torch in the reflection. I turned to face her, and she looked down at me with a softness, a sympathy in her eyes. Hecate, goddess of magic, witchcraft, and crossroads. Apt as I was at a crossroads now, confused, with nowhere to turn. Tell me, Hecate, my dear cousin, please, is it witchcraft that stole Persephone away? She handed me one of the 2 torches she carried, and shook her head in denial. She pressed a finger to her lips, and held out her hand. I took it and she helped me up. Then we walked to the cave entrance together. There she looked to the rising dawn, and I knew what to do. I took the torch, now with more strength than I had felt in days, for my hope was renewed. I stormed to the edge of the horizon and stopped the chariot of the sun in its tracks. Fair Apollo at its helm, he couldn't make eye contact with me. He moved the reins from one hand to the other, anxiously, as he said he did not see. He had no knowledge of the girl I was seeking, but Helios, the mighty sun itself, ever watchful and known to never keep his mouth shut. He let it all out. He saw a dark chariot burst from the ground of my meadow. He had heard the scream of my baby girl as she was whisked away into a tunnel down below. And he knew the man to blame. My own brother. I asked but one question as the answer settled in my heart. Does Zeus know? For our king could stop this all with a snap of his fingers. It was his duty. Apollo looked away, his mouth in a tight line. But Helios looked me in the eyes and replied, The king knows all, cousin. You know this already. I thought to blame Hades, thinking he had executed this scheme alone. Of course not. Hades would never defy our king. If Zeus had known and not stopped this, then he had plotted this himself. Planned against me, gone behind my back to give our daughter away. She was not ours. She was mine. And that was the final straw. The torch in my hands cracked clean in 2, then crumbled into ashes in my hands. I went back to my meadow, and there I let my grief consume me. I would not storm to Olympus and scream in his face. I wallowed and I wailed. I felt like my power had been stripped from me, a hollow in my immortal body where my heart should be. I worried for my daughter, for my greatest fear had come to pass. She had been stolen. There was nothing I could do. In that grief, there was such powerlessness. Until the cold rage came creeping back, and it felt better than any empty sadness. For it fueled me, gave me the strength, for I knew what I had to do. They would not just take my daughter from me without consequence. No, I wouldn't let them off that easily. They forget how necessary I am. They forget the power I hold. I am their sister, and I will make them pay for what they have done to me. And to her, my precious flower. I would get her back. If it was the last thing I did, I would make them all pay. Into the darkness and through the swirling mists, we twisted and turned. His horses galloping through thin air, through the thick wall of fog until we burst through it, into the air above. Below were many waters and scattered isles. Everything seemed grey and dark here. As we rode through the air, I grabbed onto the only solid thing. The back of Hades, my arms gripping around his waist as he laughed.
You have nothing to fear here, Persephone. Come, let me show you the most beautiful part of this realm.
Past the rivers and the great gates, where the three-headed dog sat wagging its tail. He leapt up towards us as we passed, barking with joy in an echo as his three heads all chimed in at contrasting times. But on we rode. We swept above fields of what looked like ash. Beyond more rivers still. It was nothing like the fields of earth, the meadows of home I was so accustomed to. But through an invisible barrier we flew, and then the realm around me burst with colour. He showed me the lands, the souls, and the godly folk that lived here. And finally, he turned to me with a glint in his eye and showed me the heart of the underworld. The palace of Hades, at the centre of this realm, and in the glittering throne room of polished onyx, he showed me his throne, and another that sat beside his. And he said,
Goddess of spring, I see something in you, a quiet power that goes overshadowed in the world above. Yes, you suit the role of daughter and goddess well, but I offer you this. The chance to be something more than your mother's daughter, a chance to grow into something new. A kingdom to rule, together as equals, the power of half of the realm, the power of the underworld at your disposal. Here you may discover what you wish, do what you wish, and you will have my undying admiration. And I hope one day you will accept my love and, just perhaps, come to love me in return. But the choice is yours.
I was shocked and didn't know what to say. I looked to the window and thought of my mother, how she had kept me in that meadow, when I'd asked countless times to see others, see Olympus, or just more of the world. and I knew then, but did not quite want to believe, that perhaps she would never let me go. But still, I longed for her. She was my mother, of course. I asked him to let me think, to perhaps sit, as I grew quite light-headed all of a sudden. And he conjured shadows that swept up from the floor into a long table with chairs. I quickly collapsed as the shadows disappeared. I asked to see my mother. Not to leave, just to see how she was. With a wave of his hand, a smile on his face, he summoned a shining plate from the shadowy table. It began to flicker to life, showing images of my mother, alone in our meadow. But there was no plant in sight. Snows and frosts covered some of the lands, and as the images changed, droughts and scorching heat consumed the rest. The flickering lights showed me the whole planet was barren. My mother, in her grief, had neglected her duties. No, she'd gone beyond. She had killed each plant, willfully.
It is true. Demeter, the goddess of agriculture and the harvest, had brought the first winters to the world. After but a few weeks, Zeus requested my presence on Olympus. Persephone was taking time to think, exploring my realm alone, so I flew through the first entrance, through one of the few portals from the underworld into the mortal realm. It opened into a cave, and I flew into the night skies. I looked down at the meadow of Demeter as I flew to Olympus, and a shudder ran down my spine. The earth, the world, it looked so bare, so barren, and the mortals in their houses, shaking in the cold. Their fields were bare, their hearts empty of fire. I heard the weeping and saw the starved faces. The effect had not gone unnoticed in the underworld, as more souls appeared on the shores of the realm. But I flew on to Olympus. I flew past the gates, straight to the personal balcony of my brother, Zeus the king. Gaia had her eyes on us too, as she had been at the first meeting. She had helped our plan to bring Persephone to the underworld. The look on his face told me all I needed to know, and yet he went on. He launched into the issue with the poor mortals, the loss of life, the starving mouths, but most of all, the lack of sacrifice. The anger they now held towards us, the gods, for they had stopped worship. They had ceased all prayer, and the gods on Mount Olympus were frightened. Zeus, for once, did not know what to do, but when I came to him before, asking for Persephone, he had sworn to me that I would be allowed to woo her, to ask for her hand. In fact, he was glad I had set sights on someone, pleased that perhaps I would not be alone. It was his idea to go around Demeter, knowing our sister would never let her precious daughter even meet a male god, let alone discuss marriage. But we had underestimated her, even with Gaia on our side. For it was her powers that conjured the flower and the tunnel between the realms. With the blessings of the grandmother and the king, I thought I'd done the best possible option. But Zeus looked at me with desperate eyes. This was the first time I'd asked anything of him for myself. Just a chance, and now I had nothing. for he, our king, had no choice. Without prayer, we knew not what would happen, and the mortals were perishing, my realm being overrun. Demeter had brought the idea of ruin to our door. She had threatened the very existence of the gods, for Olympus had begun to crumble in the wake of the lack of mortal worship. As we sought for solutions, none came, but to bend to her will. Gaia's presence left the meeting as we concluded. I turned to the balcony, ready to depart. But then, my brother, with a smirk on his face, brought me back to his room, poured me a drink, and reminded me of the rules of my realm. With a slap on my back, a wink in his eye, he finished his drink and watched me fly back, a dilemma on my mind. To trick Persephone, or just tell her the truth? To let her leave me, or no, I will not have to let her go.
When Hades came for me, I was wandering the fields, discovering the flowers that from above I had thought were ash. This place was so different, and yet it felt like it could become familiar. Like it could become home. I had spoken with the souls and discovered more of the plight on earth, but Hades led me back to the castle. At the table there was a grand feast, foods of every variety on platters spread out. Anything I could imagine. He offered a seat, and I asked for my mother. I asked for the souls entering this land, refusing to eat a morsel, only sipping from the water. He tried to smile, but it fell easily under my gaze. Hades was never one to keep things from me, and so he told me all about the meetings with Zeus and with Gaia, the promises made, the asking for my hand, the plot to get past my mother. My heart ached for her, but this place, the god before me, it all drew me in. I wanted more of this place, yet I was torn between my mother and the girl I was but yesterday, for the earth and the humans, and for the woman I could be, the place I could have, and the man offering himself to me. Perhaps even the love I could have. I did not know what to do, yet he kept eyeing my plate. One little secret kept behind his eyes.
I'm sorry, my love. I had to see you again.
Oh, Hades, you fool. I knew of the rules of the underworld. One thing my mother taught me: never eat the food of a stranger. She knew at least to teach me ways to keep myself safe. For in that time that you spent with Zeus and Gaia, I spent discussing this place with the souls inside it. They know all the secrets and tricks, for some of them have been here for eons. I was smart enough to ask the rules of the land before your return. To eat of the food of another realm, especially the land of the dead, is to tie yourself to that land. To be trapped there, and yet.
Oh, you are clever, wife, and tricksy. How did I never see it before?
Yes, husband. You saw me take a handful of pomegranate seeds just before Hermes interrupted. As you turned to receive him, I spat out half, for I could not choose. How could I? Between a life I knew and a life I had yet to experience, between my mother and a love that could be. But if I had gone back, she would not have let me leave. I knew that deep down. But I could not just stay here. For what of the mortals? What of the gods? Zeus and Gaia themselves could not get my mother to back down. What makes you think I could? But I could not have her hate me for leaving her. And so, I spat out half, for I could not choose. For Hermes took me in the chariot we rode in on, to the cave, the portal between realms, my mother open-armed waiting on the other side. I ran to her and wept when I held her, for I had missed her so. But she knew as she let go that I was no longer just hers to keep. She thought I was tricked. She never thought to blame me, for she had no idea I knew, had no idea that it was my choice. But I was home, and that's all that mattered. And so, spring came for the mortals too. Persephone, goddess of spring, brought life and prosperity back to the world. Mother let the plants grow, and even she could not go against the rules of the universe. So, when the months whittled away and the time came, she finally had to let me go. So now, I go to my husband and kingdom each autumn time. Mother mourns but cannot intercede, and the humans still live, their worship back in full. Zeus free from my mother's wrath, Hades no longer alone. I grew to love him deeply, and my mother still with her precious child, although not year-round. And myself, both goddess of spring and queen of the underworld. With stories of my rule in the underworld, my relationship to Hades, all the people and mortals that crept into our realm, are for another time.